A handyman, a counselor, and someone who's born again. All that and more on this week's Ancient Journey Criminal Coincidence. But before we begin, don't forget, if you enjoy our content, hit that like button, share the video, and subscribe. Now let's get started. The lives and crimes of serial killers are scrutinized and studied for every last detail. And in some cases, the killer's brain will be studied as well. All of this in an attempt to determine what it is that makes these fiendish criminals act the way they do. But along the way, there are some strange coincidences and stories that are unearthed to go along with the gory details, some of which may seem hard to believe, but are indeed true. Ted Bundy would admit to 30 murders, although authorities believe he may have left out a few, and that number was closer to 40. But before Bundy would go on to take lives, he actually would work in a career trying to save them. Believe it or not, Bundy worked at a Seattle suicide hotline, answering the phones and trying to prevent callers from taking their own lives. And Bundy had a coworker at the hotline who would go on to be famous as well, author Ann Rule, who would go on to write dozens of crime novels, would share meals and conversations with Bundy while at work. Ann Rule would go on to be sued for $12 million by a former football player named Randall Woodfield. Randall Woodfield was selected by the Green Bay Packers in the 1974 NFL Draft. Woodfield was drafted to play wide receiver for Green Bay, but was cut in training camp before ever making the team. Woodfield would go on to commit a series of crimes, including robberies along Interstate 5 along the west coast of the United States. Woodfield is suspected to have murdered over 40 people. So yes, the Green Bay Packers drafted a serial killer, and Randall Woodfield would go on to sue Ann Rule over the book that she wrote about him, called The I-5 Killer. Dennis Rader had a good gig as an alarm installer for the Kansas-based company known as ADT. He would spend many long days doing installations of security alarms at residences in Kansas neighborhoods. And there was a reason he was so busy. Homeowners in the area were concerned over a series of murders that were happening. The killer, who would come to be known as the BTK killer, would bind, torture, and then kill his victims. Dennis was more familiar with the story, since not only was he the person installing those home security alarms, but Dennis also was the BTK killer. Rader would kill 10 victims before being arrested in 2005. No word on how many alarms he installed. Ed Gein never installed alarms, but did hold jobs as a handyman and a road worker for the county in Plainfield, Wisconsin. Gein would be suspected of killing 7 people and mutilating their bodies. In addition, Gein admitted to being a grave robber. Gein's crimes would inspire Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho and the Buffalo Bill character from the movie Silence of the Lambs. When he was arrested, Gein's home was in almost unlivable condition, as Gein had filled the home with trash. Oddly, the living room and the bedroom of Gein's mother, who was long since deceased, remained spotless. 15 years after Ed Gein's arrest, another killer from the Midwest, who also worked as a handyman, begins his rampage. John Wayne Gacy would murder at least 33 young men and boys between 1972 and 1978. Gacy had been arrested in 1968 for assaulting a boy in Iowa, but would go free to kill again. Gacy would be caught, found guilty, and sentenced to death for his crimes, and he would go on to be executed by lethal injection in 1994. Gacy was executed on the anniversary of the first time he was arrested, May the 10th, and on May the 10th, 1994, another famous event would happen. A solar eclipse would blot out the sun for a time across most of the United States. But May the 10th would also be the day that another serial killer would be baptized in the Columbia Correctional Facility, also in Wisconsin. Jeffrey Dahmer would be born again, and his baptism and newly found faith didn't change his fate. He would be murdered by a fellow inmate later that year. When asked why he killed the born-again Dahmer, the inmate simply replied, "God made me do it." Dahmer was killed in November, a month that holds a special significance in the world of serial killers. More serial killers are born in the month of November compared to any other month of the year. Derek Bird, Ted Bundy, Kristen Gilbert, Belle Gunness, Charles Manson, Dennis Nilsen, David Parker Ray, Moses Sithole, Charles Starkweather, Carl Eugene Watts, and Rosemary West were all serial killers, all born in the month of November. So serial killers are infamous for their crimes, but a lot of them seem to share some odd connections with each other. Thanks for watching, and thanks for sharing the journey.